There are moments in life, quiet, unmarked on any calendar, where something ancient stirs beneath the surface of your routine. You're not sure if it began with a sudden loss, a haunting dream, or a sense of dissonance while scrolling through a crowd of smiling faces that felt hollow. But something changes. The skin of the world begins to ripple. What was once solid becomes fluid. And behind every laugh, every job, every sunset, every disappointment, you begin to sense a deeper architecture like a ghost pressing gently against glass, waiting to be seen. To speak of spiritual awakening is to wander into the terrain of paradox. It is at once an event and a process, a shattering and a remembering. It does not arrive with fanfare or certificates. Instead, it bleeds through the cracks of ordinary life, an unexpected stillness during chaos, a tear shed without knowing why, the feeling that you are both the dreamer and the dreamed. In these fragile electric moments, we sense that reality is not as it appears. We are not merely bodies chasing goals on a linear path. We are ancient beings, curled within the womb of time, beginning to stir again. The idea of stages, 3 to be exact, offers a compass, not a cage. It does not seek to reduce the infinite spiral of awakening into steps on a checklist. Rather, it gives shape to the shapeless. It gives language to what many have felt but few can articulate. That awakening moves like a wave, sometimes crashing, sometimes whispering, always reshaping the shorelines of the self. And while each path is deeply personal, there are recurring signatures, patterns, archetypes, markers that suggest that while your journey is uniquely yours, it is not solitary. This is not just a psychological shift. It is not merely about positive thinking or healing trauma or becoming a better version of yourself. It is a tectonic reorientation of consciousness. You begin to question the nature of the game itself. The you that was forged in childhood, trained by culture, sculpted by shame and desire, that identity begins to unravel. And in its place, silence. Mystery. A flickering sense of something both terrifying and liberating. You were never that persona to begin with. If you're reading this now, there's a high probability you're already submerged in what we'll come to call the second stage, the liminal corridor between illusion and integration. It is the stage of unraveling, of shedding skins. It's where you feel suspended between worlds. You no longer believe the myths that society fed you, but you're not yet anchored in something stable. You are in the sacred in-between, and although it may feel like confusion, like freefall, like grief, you are not lost. You are being dismantled, divinely undone, so that something eternal can step forward. The first stage, the great forgetting, the slumber, the identification with the mask, is not wrong. It is part of the design. The soul, like the seed, must begin underground. It must mistake the soil for the sky before it knows to reach upward. And the final stage, the embodiment, the return, the luminous grounding of truth into action, is not the goal, but the unfolding. It is not a place to get to, but a space to return from. The point is not perfection, but presence. Spiritual awakening is not an escape. It is not an exalted state where suffering no longer exists. It is the radical act of remembering who and what you are while fully inhabiting the chaos of the human experience. It is being willing to hold pain in one hand and divinity in the other. It is the awareness that even the darkness is holy. Even the confusion has choreography. The cosmos, in all its infinite complexity, does not waste experience. Every heartbreak, every frustration, every synchronicity is a note in a greater song. And awakening is the tuning of your ears to that music. Once you hear it, even faintly, you cannot unhear it. The dance has begun, and yet it is not always beautiful. The second stage, the one most find themselves in now, is often mistaken for regression. It feels like spiritual vertigo. Old habits resurface, relationships shift. There is a sense of being stripped, raw, exposed. But this is not backsliding. This is the sacred molting. You are shedding borrowed skin. What feels like confusion is actually clarity in disguise, demanding a new language. In a world that monetizes illusion, awakening can feel like madness. To question the default settings of society is to risk exile. But remember, Prophets were always mistaken for lunatics before time vindicated their vision. You are not here to fit in. You are here to remember. To remember the infinite intelligence woven into your breath. To remember that even now, especially now, you are precisely where you need to be. You are not broken. You are breaking open. To understand the architecture of a spiritual awakening, we must not treat it like a stairway or a curriculum, but more like the unfolding of a lotus. Layer by layer, petal by petal, the center reveals itself, not through striving, but through surrender. Each stage of awakening echoes a universal pattern, a sacred rhythm embedded in myth, biology, and even celestial motion. From seed to sprout, from chrysalis to winged flight, all transformation follows an arc of dormancy, disintegration, and eventual emergence. What we call a spiritual awakening is simply the human embodiment of that ageless pattern. At its core, this journey is not about acquiring something new, but remembering what was always present. The stages do not add to you, they strip you down. They peel back the inherited stories, the unconscious roles, the socially coded reflexes that calcified over years of conditioning. What remains is not an upgraded self, but a truer one, a quieter, clearer flame. The first stage is marked by deep forgetfulness. It is life under a spell, a trance made of deadlines, distractions, and false dreams sold as salvation. But that forgetting is not a failure. It is a necessary incubation. It allows the soul to enter the world unguarded, to gather experience, to collide with contrast. It's only within the illusion that the desire for truth is born. Then comes the second stage, where most find themselves paused, pulled, or purged. This is the shattering, though few recognize it as sacred. It feels like chaos. You may begin to distrust everything. Your beliefs, your ambitions, your relationships, even your sense of self. The center does not hold, because it was never your true center to begin with. This is the corridor of sacred disorientation. The illusions you clung to for comfort start to dissolve like sugar in rain. You can no longer go back, but you're terrified to go forward. This is the cocoon state, where all that once defined you begins to liquefy, and no new form has yet taken shape. In this phase, you may find yourself drifting away from things that once lit your soul on fire. The job that once made sense begins to feel like a costume. Friendships thin out, sometimes violently. The books that once thrilled you suddenly seem hollow. You begin to taste the emptiness behind much of what society calls success. And so you search. For truth. For presence. For something real enough to hold in both hands. But here's the mystery. The more you search outward, the more you feel lost. That's because the second stage demands an inward descent. It is not about ascending into bliss, but diving into the underworld of your psyche. It is here that you meet your shadows, those exiled parts of self that have waited patiently in the dark. You begin to feel the weight of suppressed emotion, ancestral trauma, and the false self you've performed for so long. And in this descent, you discover something sacred, that your pain is not proof of your failure, but the birthplace of your power. The final stage is not an escape from the world, but a deeper participation in it. It is the return, not as a role-playing actor, but as an awakened soul. You re-enter the world not to conform, but to transform. You embody what you've remembered. You anchor presence into action. And you do so not by preaching or performing, but simply by being. Here, the divine is no longer a concept, but a living current. You walk through life with eyes that see beneath the surface, a heart that pulses with cosmic rhythm, and hands that touch with reverence. But the stages are not perfectly linear. They overlap, repeat, spiral. Some days you wake up radiant with clarity, others you sink into the old fog. This is not regression, it's refinement. Like seasons, the process circulates. The key is not to resist, but to attune, to recognize the texture of each stage and surrender to its wisdom. The forgetting has its role, the unraveling has its purpose, and the return has its crown. Another core thread woven through these stages is the dissolution of identity, not in a nihilistic way, but in a liberating one. You begin to realize that who you thought you were was just a bundle of memory, culture, reaction, and survival. You realize that your truest self is not something that can be labeled, but something that is felt, a presence, a stillness behind the roles. This is perhaps the most terrifying and exhilarating realization, that the you defended, polished, and protected is not you at all. And yet, this doesn't mean becoming vacant or passive. On the contrary, it allows for the deepest form of engagement, with life, with others, with purpose. When you no longer cling to an identity, you become a channel. You become available. You begin to move from essence, not ego. And life in return begins to move through you like wind through open curtains. Many are in the second stage now, even if they don't have a name for it. The world itself appears to be going through it, a collective dark night, where old systems crumble and hidden truths emerge. We are witnessing the death of borrowed myths, and though it looks like chaos, it is the same sacred dissolution that happens in the human heart. The planet is molting, the collective soul is awakening. To walk this path is not to transcend the world, but to re-enter it with new eyes. It is not about bypassing pain, but embracing it as a portal. It is not about reaching some mystical mountaintop, but realizing that divinity was always curled within the most ordinary moments. The laugh of a child, the rustle of leaves, the stillness between thoughts. Spiritual awakening is not a destination, but a deepening. A homecoming to what never left. To describe spiritual awakening in concrete terms is to do it a subtle disservice, for awakening is not a map, but a metamorphosis. And sometimes, only story, symbolic, archetypal, poetic, can hold the shape of something this vast. So let us now enter the inner temple of symbols. Let us explore the soul's unfolding through metaphor, where truth is not declared, but revealed, like moonlight spilling through cracks in a forgotten chapel. Imagine a traveler born in a grand palace. The halls echo with rules, reverence, and tradition. From infancy, the traveler is told who they are, what is valuable, and where their journey must lead. The walls are adorned with portraits of ancestors, each bearing titles, achievements, and legacy. The traveler learns to walk with polished shoes, to speak in approved tones, to dream dreams that are already sanctioned. The palace is warm, safe, familiar. But one night, something stirs. A whisper through the lattice. A breeze through the window that wasn't supposed to open. The traveler, curious and oddly unsettled, follows it. Down a staircase, through an arch, and then a door ajar, leading out into the unknown. A forest, a silence, a sky without ceiling. This moment, though seemingly small, is everything. It is the soul's first flicker of doubt, of disobedience. It is the intuition that there is more to life than legacy and portraits and polished shoes. This moment is the first stage, the threshold crossing. The forgetting begins to fracture. The palace does not burn, it simply loses its luster. The traveler does not yet know where they're going. They only know they can no longer stay. The second stage is the forest, dense, overgrown, without a clear path. The traveler stumbles through tangled roots and strange sounds. Here, the symbols shift. Light becomes dim. The moon becomes the only guide. Creatures once seen as frightening, wolves, serpents, shadows, now accompany the traveler in strange companionship. They teach, they confront, they reflect. Here, the traveler must face their own projections. They come upon a mirror in the woods and see not their noble face from the palace, but a collage of selves. The child who was silenced, the desires they repressed, the wounds they hid. It is terrifying. It is liberating. The forest does not lie. It brings forth everything that was buried. In the forest, time moves differently. Some wander for days that feel like years. Others find themselves in loops, repeating patterns, reliving betrayals, hearing the same inner doubts whispered in different voices. This looping is not punishment, it is refinement. Each loop offers another layer of recognition, another opportunity to step out of the trance. And then, one day without warning, the traveler sees light breaking through the canopy. They emerge, not back into the palace, but into something new, a clearing, a mountain, a horizon they could never have imagined from inside the old walls. This is the third stage, not an escape from the world, but a re-inhabiting of it. The traveler now walks barefoot. Their speech is no longer rehearsed, but resonant. They wear no crown, but their eyes carry the weight of stars. They no longer seek to belong to a structure, for they have become the structure. Their life becomes a beacon. This narrative may feel ancient because it is. It echoes in myths across time. The Buddha leaving his palace to wander beneath trees, Jesus retreating to the desert before returning with parables, Inanna descending to the underworld, shedding her titles until she stood naked before the void. These are not merely religious tales, they are psychological blueprints. Spiritual awakenings are not modern fads. They are primordial fires. And each story points to the same truth. To awaken is to die and be reborn again and again. Another symbol that captures the second stage's essence is that of the serpent shedding its skin. This is not a gentle process. The snake must rub itself raw against stone. It cannot preserve its old skin and grow. Similarly, we cannot carry our former identity into the new awareness. The friction, the discomfort, the rawness of the process, it is all essential. The snake does not mourn the old skin, nor does it apologize for its transformation. It simply moves forward, gleaming and new, ready for the next terrain. Or think of the chrysalis. Inside that dark cocoon, the caterpillar does not simply grow wings and fly, it dissolves. Fully, its body liquefies. Identity, form, structure, gone. It becomes pure potential before reorganizing into something radically different. This is why the second stage feels so disorienting. You are not just changing habits, you are becoming something that cannot yet be named. There's an old saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. But in the second stage, the teacher is often not a sage or guide, but the very experience of falling apart. Heartbreak becomes the guru. Illness becomes initiation. Silence becomes scripture. The sacred is no longer confined to temples. It appears in traffic jams, in sleepless nights, in the slow erosion of what you once held sacred. And this too is grace. These symbols, palaces, forests, serpents, cocoons, are not meant to be clung to, but to be absorbed. They are lenses, mirrors, invitations. Each contains a vibration, a resonance that may awaken something dormant within you. If a certain story lingers or a metaphor stirs something beneath the surface, let it. Do not analyze it too quickly. Let the symbol do its work. Symbols speak in the language of the soul, and the soul is always listening. So if you feel lost, raw, suspended in between, know that you are not alone. You are in the forest. You are molting. You are dissolving. And this is not a mistake. This is the hidden heartbeat of awakening, pulsing beneath the chaos. Trust the process, even if you cannot name it. Eventually, all awakenings must touch the ground. It is one thing to dissolve illusions in a silent meditation, or to taste eternity under starlight. But what does it mean when you wake up late, when your phone won't stop buzzing, when bills stack on the table, and the neighbor's dog won't stop barking? The true test of awakening is not found in visions or revelations, but in how those revelations are lived in the heat of daily life. Awakening that does not root itself in the soil of ordinary existence becomes another illusion, one of spiritual superiority or cosmic escapism. This is the paradox of the journey. As the veil lifts and the world begins to shimmer with hidden dimension, you must also continue doing your laundry. You must still answer emails, hold space for a crying friend, confront injustice, plant gardens, take care of your aching body. But now, there is a deeper thread humming beneath it all, a current of presence. Where once your actions were motivated by habit or fear, they now begin to pulse with intentionality. The smallest things take on a sacred weight. Washing a dish becomes a meditation. A glance, a smile, a breath, all become portals. The difference is not in what you do, but how. You begin to live from the inside out. In the second stage, the space of unraveling, this integration can feel disorienting. You may swing between moments of deep clarity and flashes of old programming. One day you speak from the center of your soul. The next, you're caught in anxiety, reactivity, judgment. But this is not failure. This is integration. Like a new rhythm being learned by the body, your nervous system is adjusting to a higher frequency. Your emotional landscape is reorganizing. Awakening is not a single moment of enlightenment. It is 1,000 tiny choices made in alignment with truth. Relationships shift, and not always gently. As your values reorient, so too does your inner circle. You may find yourself drifting from certain people, not out of malice, but because the shared script no longer fits. Conversations that once energized you may now feel empty. You crave depth, authenticity, stillness. And while loneliness may visit you in the space between tribes, it also becomes a powerful teacher. In solitude, you learn to source your center from within. Work transforms too, not necessarily in form, but in feeling. If your job once felt like a cage, awakening might stir you to leave it, but more often, it calls you to infuse it with purpose. You become less interested in hierarchy, more devoted to contribution. The question changes from what do I get to what do I give? And in that shift, something paradoxical occurs. Abundance begins to flow, not as a reward, but as a byproduct of alignment. Even your creative energy changes. You no longer create to impress, but to express. You write, speak, build, and share from a different root. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to face suffering differently. Not with denial or spiritual bypassing, but with presence. You stop labeling pain as bad or unspiritual. You understand that darkness too is a womb, that tears are sacred, that grief is a form of love turned inward. You stop trying to fix your sadness and start listening to it. You stop judging your anger and start honoring its message. Emotional honesty becomes a spiritual practice, and through this honest living, the heart softens, compassion deepens. You start seeing others not as opponents or obstacles, but as fellow travelers, each carrying invisible burdens, each dancing with their own shadows. You learn to pause, to respond rather than react. You start catching the inner critic mid-sentence and choosing silence instead. You start hearing the stories in your head. I'm not enough. They don't see me. I always mess up, and gently question them. You do not banish them. You sit beside them like old ghosts. You witness their fading power, and in that witnessing, a new voice begins to rise, quieter, but truer. This new voice doesn't shout, it hums. It speaks in nudges, feelings, synchronicities. It is the voice of intuition, of inner knowing. In the early stages, you may doubt it. The mind, trained by fear and logic, will question this quieter wisdom. But with practice, you begin to recognize its rhythm. You begin to trust that which cannot be proven. You make decisions based on resonance, not reputation. And as you do, life begins to respond in kind. Doors open, timing aligns. The universe reveals itself not as random, but as intimately responsive. There are also challenges that arise when living from this place. Not everyone will understand. Some will misinterpret your transformation as arrogance or detachment. Some will test your boundaries, expecting the old version of you to return. But awakening calls for a fierce tenderness, a love that is strong enough to say no when needed and soft enough to stay open in the face of misunderstanding. Boundaries become sacred, not walls, but membranes. They protect the space where your inner light is still crystallizing, and then there is the return to the world, the third stage taking root. You begin to see yourself as a node within a larger web. Your healing affects others. Your honesty invites others to be honest. You no longer seek to escape the chaos of the world, but to bring light into it. Whether as a parent, artist, teacher, healer, builder, or neighbor, you become a transmitter. Your presence becomes medicine, not because you're trying, but because you're aligned. This is not about perfection. There is no final arrival. The spiral of awakening deepens with every turn. But now, even your setbacks become sacred. Your wounds become initiations. Your human flaws no longer disqualify you from truth. They become part of its expression. You are no longer pretending to be enlightened. You are practicing being real. And that, in the end, is the most radical act. So here we are, at the end, which is not an end at all, but a circling back to where we began. Now with eyes that see differently, ears tuned to the frequency of the soul, and a heart that remembers its ancient rhythm. This journey through the stages of awakening does not provide closure in the way we once imagined. It opens space. Space within the self. Space between thoughts. Space between the known and the possible. And that space, alive with silence, trembling with mystery, is not empty. It is luminous. The palace, the forest, the mountain, these are not places out there, but stages of inner weather. Thresholds of consciousness we pass through again and again in this spiral dance of becoming. You now recognize that what you once called disorientation was divine redirection. What felt like the collapse of identity was the loosening of illusion. You were never meant to be just one thing. You were never meant to stay in the palace or remain in the cocoon. You were meant to move, to shed, to rise, and then to return. Return not as you were, but as who you are becoming. For the second stage, where many remain suspended for years, is not a mistake, not a punishment, not a purgatory. It is the holy chrysalis. It is the womb of truth. It holds you until your new wings are ready, and yes, sometimes it feels like dying. But this dying is sacred. It is not the end of life, but the end of the false life, the one lived in fear, in conformity, in masks inherited from generations asleep. You are not here to be asleep. You are not here to play small. You are a fracture of the infinite wearing a name. You are a poem written by God and then forgotten so that you could rediscover yourself line by line. You are what remains when every mask falls away, when every identity dissolves into the stillness behind your eyes. The third stage, the re-emergence, is not a reward for enduring the dark night. It is the natural blooming of the seed that trusted the dark. You begin to move differently, not because you have answers, but because you are no longer afraid of not having them. Not because you are free from emotion, but because you are free within them. You become a witness, a weaver, a quiet force of integration. You do not just speak truth, you are truth expressed in human form. And this is the transformational call, not to ascend beyond the world, but to inhabit it more fully. To bring the light you found in the forest into every hallway, kitchen, and meeting room. To touch the hands of those still asleep with a gentleness that says, I see you. I remember what it was like. To speak not with the arrogance of knowing, but with the compassion of one who remembers forgetting. Let the awakening become an offering. You don't need to change the world all at once. The world shifts in micro-movements, a stranger feeling seen, a friend comforted, a child protected, a system questioned, a story rewritten. Let your awakening become medicine for the moment you're in. Let your very presence create a permission field for others to become real. And when the confusion returns, as it will, remember, it is not regression, it is recursion. The spiral deepens. The forest speaks again. The chrysalis calls you back, not because you failed, but because there is always more to shed, more to burn, more to become. Each cycle of awakening reveals subtler illusions, deeper truths, wider horizons. There is no graduation from this path, only greater and greater intimacy with the present, with yourself, with the divine as it lives, breathes, aches, and sings through this human form you temporarily wear. So breathe. Look up at the sky, listen for the silence beneath sound, and when someone asks you what you're doing with your life, smile softly and say, I am remembering. Because that is the truth. You are remembering, and it is enough.